Last week, you developed the Hello World application in a command line interface, also known as a console application. The Hello World application is the first program that most people write when they're developing in a new programming language. This week, I'm going to ask you to do Hello World again, but this time you will be doing it in a Windows Form application. A Windows Form application is a graphical user interface, and we'll call that a GUI. So here's a picture of a GUI that you could develop in CSharp. A GUI is comprised of objects. So most programming languages now are object-oriented, and a GUI normally is object-oriented. So what are the objects that you have in this Windows Form application? We have the form itself. There's actually a lot of code that you don't even need to write to create this form. Who wrote that code? Well, if you're using C#, Microsoft wrote that code, and that code is in a library that is provided for you when you install Visual Studio. You're not even aware that all that code exists, but the installation process puts a library of code for you that creates the form object. There's code also that creates label objects for you and text box objects. In a GUI, what starts the processing? Well, the user has to start the processing usually, and in a GUI we like to add buttons to start that process. We have two buttons here, and what's going to happen depends on what the user is going to do. Is the user going to click the Calculate Gross Pay button or the Exit button? So more about objects. First of all, objects have properties, and properties are data stored in the object. There's lots of different pieces of data that an object can have. An object has methods. It's something that an object can do. So let's look at this form again, and this form has data about it. For example, what makes this form this wide and this high? Well, the width and the height property determines that. What makes the title of this form say Wage Calculator? That is another property to this specific form. Now I can create another instance of a form, and I can make it a different height and a different width and have a different title. Each form object then has its own data. Objects that are visible, if your user sees them, they're known as controls. There are also invisible objects. And invisible objects, they're still objects, we just won't call them controls. And as we go through the semester, we'll learn a couple of the invisible objects. So these objects, well, they're an object. They must have properties, they must have methods, but they're doing something in the background because the user won't interact with them. In the book, the author has given us an example of a GUI that's a wage calculator. So I've written this in the console application, and we'll look at it a second. So it's prompting me to enter the pay rate, $20 an hour, and it's prompting me to enter how many hours you work, say 35, and then it's giving me output. It's making a calculation and giving me the output. $700 is the gross pay, and when I hit exit, it will exit my application that I wrote. This is a simple input, process, output program. The input is data, and the data has to go into something called variables. When I entered 20 for pay rate, it's being stored in this thing called pay rate. I got to make the name up. When I entered 35, I believe, for hours, that 35 is being stored here. We call these variables. Input, this is when we're getting the input here. This console.read line means read that 20 and put it into paid rate. Read that 35 and put it into hours. Okay? So input is happening right there. Once you get your input, let your computer calculate what you need. The purpose of this program is to calculate gross pay. So here my computer is calculating gross pay by multiplying pay rate times hours. Finally, after you've got the results, you need to display the results. And here we are displaying the gross pay. Okay? And we're formatting it with, let's see, 2 decimal places. So this is a simple, not event-driven program. It will always go in the same order. In other words, I don't want to enter pay rate first. I want to enter hours. No chance. In this type of program, which is not event-driven, you must follow the sequence that the coder wrote this in. So let's look at the other example, which uses a Windows Form application. It is going to be event driven. So I have here, very similar to what the text has, labels and text boxes. Now my input's going to come from the text box. This is where the output's going to be. I have 2 buttons to do the work. I'll go ahead and run this. Do I have to enter pay rate first? And the answer is no. Maybe I'll exit first. That's fine. Well, I have to run it again to demonstrate it again. Maybe I'll enter hours first. So you see, this is event driven. The order that things are happening is determined by the user and what the user decides to do. Usually, graphical user interfaces are event driven. Let's take a look a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about properties and objects that we were just looking at in the slide. So here is a text box object. And the properties, remember, is the data about that object. And if you've got the default view here, you're going to have a properties windows down here in the bottom right corner. I'm going to pull it out so you can see it a little bit better. But this is all the property about this text box, which I gave the name hours text box because it's collecting the hours. For example, there's a size property. That's data about this. And I could make the width bigger. Say maybe I'll make it 150 instead. And you notice it got bigger than my form. That's not a good idea. Or I could change the text property. Text property is what the user will see inside the text box. Normally, for when it's input, we want to leave that alone. But what if I say, well, everybody normally works 40 hours, so I'm going to put a 40 inside of there. Notice the text property, when I put a 40 here, displayed a 40 inside of there. So all of these properties are data about this particular object. This is also a text box, but may have different data. The .NET framework was installed when you installed Visual Studio 2012. And the .NET framework has libraries of code. The code that creates an object we call a class. And you don't have to write any of those classes. If you go on to the next semester of the C# class, you will be creating your own classes which can create objects. So let's say like this. I have a blueprint to build a house. Is the blueprint the house? No, the blueprint is the directions on how to build the house. Likewise, classes is like a blueprint. A class is not the form itself or the text box, but the class is the instructions that will build an individual form and an individual text box. Finally, let's get a look at the Visual Studio environment. I know you saw it last week in the video that they displayed last week, but let's go ahead and look at it one more time. So here I am. I don't have any projects open right now. And we're going to create a Hello World application. So you're going to create this application for your next assignment. You will go to File, New Project, just like you did last week. And then under Languages, make sure you have C# selected. Last week you chose Console Application. This week I want you to choose Windows Form Application. Call it Hello World Form App. And then we'll click OK. Every time you create a Windows Form application, the form's going to be this size. You can resize it. These are called sizing handles. The form's going to be this color. The size, remember, is a property of this object. The color is a property of this object. You can come over here and you can change all of that right here in the Properties window. So if you wanted to change the background color of this form, you can come over here and make it a different color. I do want you to change this. See on the title bar it says Form 1. How descriptive is that? The default title for this form is not good. I want you to come over here and the title on a form goes in the text property. Notice here the text property says Form 1 and that says Form 1. So let's just call this Hello World App. Okay? And as soon as I hit enter here, you notice Hello World App. Shows we're going to take a label. This is the toolbox over here to the left. So I've got my label here, and what's some data I can set for this label? It's not very big. So I think I'll do something with the font. So I'm going to come over here to Properties, and let's expand the font, and it's only 8.2. No wonder it looks so small. So I'll change it to 16. And do you like that black? You can change whatever color you want. That's the 4-color property. So if you want to, you can change it to whatever color you would like. See that gray? Does that look okay? Now, so how do I say hello world? Well, that's the text property. So I'm going to come down to text property. Hello world. Okay, that was easy, wasn't it? So now I have a Windows Form application. It's saying hello world. One more thing I would like you to do, and to do this you're going to write a line of code, is we're going to put a button on here, and this button will be our exit button. So when I drag a button on here, you know notice it says button 1, okay? But you can make this say anything at all, and exit is a good one, or close. But for us, I want to change this to say goodbye, because we're going to exit. What are we going to do when we're exiting? We're going to say goodbye. Now when I did that, I noticed I don't see the whole word, so I got to make it a little bit bigger and kind of center that. You notice as I'm moving the controls around, do you notice the blue line that's helping me work on alignment? Okay, so finally what I want to do is add the one line of code that's going to make the program close when the user clicks the say goodbye button. So notice what I did. I didn't explain that very well. I double clicked on the button. So by double clicking on the button, I am going to create a little function here that's called an event procedure. And this event procedure set is called button 1 click. This means whenever button 1 is clicked, run whatever code you put in here. To write application dot exit, like that. And that means, hey, I'm exiting my application. I'm all done. Let's close this out. So let's test this. I'm going to hit the start button. Okay, and there it is. And it says hello world. And I click say goodbye, and it exits fine. Just like last week, if you get any red squiggly lines, there's an error, okay? So you got to make sure that your code is put in the right place. But that's what your program is for this week. I hope you have fun writing it.